The stars had always watched humanity. For 80 years, since the first contact, those stars had belonged to others. The Galactic Concord owned the darkness between worlds, and humanity was nothing more than a guest in their house. A tolerated guest. A laughed-at guest. A guest they planned to kill. Dr. Una Parks stared at her screen in the cold silence of the Prometheus research station. Her hands were shaking. She had checked the data 7 times. She had run it through every translation program. She had hoped desperately that she was wrong. She was not wrong. The transmission was clear. Operation Quiet Dawn. A manufactured plague designed in Vorton Laboratories. It would look natural. It would spread slowly at first, then fast, then everywhere. 90% of humanity would die within 2 years. The survivors would be too few and too broken to ever become a threat. The Concord had decided that humans bred war, like others bred children. They had decided that humanity was too dangerous to let grow. They had decided in their cold and distant council chambers that Earth's children did not deserve to live. Una's finger hovered over the transmission button. Once she sent this to Earth, everything would change. There would be no going back. She thought of her mother in Busan, her little nephew who had just started school. The billions of people who had no idea that aliens in silk robes had already signed their death warrants. She pressed the button. 3 hours later, the transmission reached every government on Earth at the same time. Presidents and generals, ministers and commanders, all of them read the same words. All of them saw the same truth. And for the first time in human history, there was no argument. There was no debate. There was only silence. Ambassador Jinho Quan was a man who believed in peace. He had spent 30 years building bridges between species, learning alien languages, understanding alien customs. He had shaken hands with creatures that had no hands. He had smiled at beings that had no faces. He believed, truly believed, that words could solve anything. He stood before the high chamber of the Galactic Concord and asked for an explanation. He kept his voice calm. He kept his hands steady. He presented the evidence with the patience of a man who still hoped for justice. Elder Vor. The High Speaker of the Concord looked down at him from his floating throne. The Vorton was ancient. His gray skin stretched thin over bones that had seen 10,000 years. His eyes held no hatred. They held something worse. They held nothing at all. Ambassador Quan, Elder Vor said, his voice echoing through the vast chamber, "Your species is young. You do not understand the galaxy as we do. We have watched civilizations rise and burn. We have seen what happens when aggressive species are allowed to spread. We are not punishing humanity. We are protecting the galaxy from what humanity will become." "We have done nothing wrong," Jinho said. "We have followed every law. We have respected every treaty." "You exist," Elder Vor replied. "That is enough. Your kind cannot help what you are. You fight each other over lines in the sand. You kill for pride. You wage wars over ideas. Imagine what you will do when you have real power. Imagine what you will do to us." He leaned forward and something like pity crossed his ancient face. "Consider this mercy, Ambassador. A quick death is kinder than the chaos you would bring." The chamber laughed. Dozens of alien species, hundreds of representatives, all of them laughed at the human who thought he could argue his way out of extinction. Jinho Quan walked out of that chamber with his back straight and his face empty. He did not speak to the reporters. He did not respond to the mocking calls that followed him. He walked to his ship, sat in his chair, and sent a single message to Earth. They will not listen. They do not see us as people. Prepare for the worst. Admiral Taiho Beek received the message in his office overlooking the Pacific Ocean. He was 63 years old. He had fought in 3 wars, all of them against other humans. He had buried friends. He had ordered men to their deaths. He knew what war meant, and he had hoped he would never see another one. He read the message twice. Then he read the intelligence report from Dr. Park. Then he sat in silence for a long time. Watching the sun set over the water, his aide knocked on the door. "Admiral, the World Council is asking for you." "I know," Taiho said. He stood slowly, feeling every year in his bones. "Tell them I am coming." The World Council met in an underground bunker that had been built for a war that never came. Now it would serve a different purpose. The leaders of every nation sat around a circular table, their faces lit by cold blue screens. There was no shouting. There was no blame. There was only the quiet understanding that everything had changed. General Hannah Choi stood at the main display, her uniform crisp, her eyes hard. She had spent her career preparing for threats that might never come. Now the threat was real, and she was ready. "The plague is scheduled for deployment in 3 months," she said. "They believe we do not know. They believe we will die, confused and afraid. They are wrong." Admiral Tae-ho Beek stepped forward. The room fell silent. He was not the highest-ranking person there, but he was the one they all looked to. He had that quality, that weight, that made people listen when he spoke. "Do we have time?" he asked. General Choi met his eyes. "If we start now? If we use everything we have been hiding? If we become what they fear we are?" The room was quiet. Everyone knew what she meant. For 40 years, humanity had been building in secret. Ships in the asteroid belt, weapons in hidden laboratories, plans that no alien had ever seen. They had hoped it would never be necessary. They had hoped the galaxy would accept them. Hope was dead now. Admiral Tae-ho Beek looked around the table. He saw fear in some eyes, anger in others. But in all of them, he saw something else. Something that had kept humanity alive through ice ages and plagues, through wars and famines, through every disaster that should have ended them. He saw the refusal to die. "Then we start now," he said. "We do not ask for permission. We do not wait for mercy. They have decided that our children do not deserve to live. We will teach them how wrong they are." No one cheered. No one clapped. They simply nodded, one by one, and began to work. In the depths of space, the Galactic Concord celebrated. The human problem would soon be solved. They raised their glasses to peace and order in a galaxy free of chaos. They did not know that on a small blue planet, humanity had stopped talking and started preparing. They would learn. Soon enough, they would learn Earth went dark on a Tuesday. The Concord's observation posts on the moon sent confused reports. The human communication networks had gone silent. No broadcasts, no signals, no noise. The busy chatter that had defined humanity for 80 years simply stopped. Elder Vor received the reports with a thin smile. "They know," he said to his advisors. "They have seen what is coming, and they have given up. The primitives accept their fate." "It is almost disappointing," his advisors agreed. Humans were emotional creatures. They had probably fallen into despair. Perhaps they were fighting among themselves, as they always did. Perhaps they were praying to their strange gods. It did not matter. In 3 months, they would be dying, and the galaxy would be safe. On Earth, humanity was not praying. Humanity was working. Director Doyon Kim had run Earth's intelligence network for 15 years. He was a small man with a quiet voice and eyes that missed nothing. His job was to know secrets, and he knew the biggest secret in the galaxy for 40 years. While humanity smiled and bowed and played the role of the harmless newcomer they had been building. Deep in the asteroid belt, hidden in the shadows between rocks, shipyards worked day and night. 2,000 warships waited in the darkness. Ships with weapons the Concorde had never seen. Ships with engines that could outrun anything in the known galaxy. Ships built by a species that had been preparing for betrayal since the day they learned they were not alone. They called it Project Goliath. Captain Min-ho Lee stood on the bridge of the Black Lotus, a stealth destroyer so advanced that it did not officially exist. He was 34 years old, young for a ship captain, but he had earned his place. He was brilliant and ruthless when he needed to be, and he understood something that the aliens had never learned about humans. They were patient. They could wait. They could smile and pretend while they sharpened their knives in the dark. "Sir," his communications officer said, "we have confirmation. All observation posts have been cleared. The aliens on the moon have been removed." "Removed?" Min-ho asked. Politely escorted off-world, sir. Those who refuse to leave are no longer a problem. Minho nodded. He felt no joy in this. He had alien friends once, or he thought he did. But friends do not plan to murder your entire species. Friends do not laugh when you beg for your children's lives. Take us to the fleet, he ordered. It is time to wake the sleeping giants. In her laboratory aboard the Prometheus, Dr. Una Park worked without sleep. She had dark circles under her eyes and coffee stains on her coat, but she did not stop. She could not stop. Every hour she spent working was an hour closer to saving her people. The Concorde's encryption was supposed to be unbreakable. 10,000 years of alien technology, layers upon layers of security that no primitive species could hope to crack. They were wrong. Humans had invented codes before they had invented writing. They had been breaking secrets since the beginning of their history. It took Una 3 weeks. When she finally broke through, she laughed out loud in her empty laboratory. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had found a weapon. She now had access to every military frequency in the Concorde, every supply route, every defense code, every secret they thought was safe. She sent the data to Admiral Taiho Beak with a simple message. They have no idea what we can do. Let us show them. Colonel Sujin, you led the Ghost Division, humanity's most secret military unit? They did not exist in any official record. They had no families, no pasts, no futures except the mission. They were ghosts, and ghosts could go anywhere. She gathered her soldiers in a bunker beneath the Korean mountains. They were the best humanity had, warriors trained since childhood, enhanced with technology that the Concorde had banned centuries ago. They looked at her with calm eyes, waiting for orders. The galaxy thinks we are weak, Sujin said. They think we will cry and beg and die on our knees. They do not know us. They do not know what we have survived. Ice ages, plagues, wars that killed millions. We are still here. We will always be here. And now we will remind the galaxy why they should have been afraid. Admiral Taiho Beak stood before a screen that showed a map of the known galaxy. Hundreds of systems, thousands of planets, trillions of beings who had decided that humanity did not deserve to exist. He studied the map for a long time. Then he began to speak. His words were broadcast to every planet in the Galactic Concorde. Every species heard him. Every leader stopped to listen. The message was simple, and it was delivered in every known language. Called us primitive. You called us weak. You called us a species to be contained. You looked at our children and decided they should die. You planned to murder us in our sleep and call it mercy. His voice was calm. It was almost gentle. That made it worse. Hear us now. We are humanity. We have walked through fire since the day we were born. We have survived everything that tried to destroy us. We do not forgive. We do not forget. And we are coming. The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, there was silence. Elder Vor sat in his throne room, surrounded by advisors who looked at each other with confusion. This was not how primitives were supposed to react. They were supposed to surrender. They were supposed to accept their fate. High Speaker, one advisor said carefully, should we increase the fleet presence near Earth? Elder Vor waved his hand. They are bluffing. What can they do? They have a few hundred ships, old technology, no experience in galactic warfare. This is desperation, nothing more. But even as he spoke, he felt something cold in his chest. He had lived for 10,000 years. He had seen many species face extinction. None of them had ever spoken like this. None of them had ever sounded so certain. In the asteroid belt, 2,000 human warships powered on their engines for the first time. Their crews were silent, focused, ready. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. They had been told that this day might never come, that it was only a precaution, that surely the galaxy would accept them eventually. The galaxy had made its choice. Now humanity would make theirs. Admiral Taiho Beak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dawn. Around him, his officers worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. There was no fear in their eyes. There was only purpose. All ships report ready, Admiral, his second-in-command reported. Tejo nodded. He thought of his grandfather, who had survived a war that killed millions. He thought of all the generations before him, all the struggles, all the suffering, all the hope. They had not survived for their descendants to be wiped out by aliens who thought they were too primitive to matter. "Begin the operation," he said. 2,000 ships moved as one, emerging from the shadows like wolves from a forest. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. They had assumed that humanity was building a few patrol boats, maybe some defense stations. They had not imagined this. In the Concorde's high chamber, alarm signals began to flash. Reports came in from every direction. Human ships were appearing everywhere, moving faster than should be possible, striking targets that were supposed to be secret. Elder Vor watched the reports with growing horror. This was not a bluff. This was not desperation. This was war, and humanity had been preparing for it longer than anyone had ever known. The first strike lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 47 Concorde military installations across 12 star systems were burning wreckage. The Concorde had expected months of preparation, weeks of warning, time to respond and crush the human rebellion before it began. They got none of that, Lieutenant. Song flew her fighter through the chaos of battle, her hands steady on the controls, her heart pounding with something that was not quite fear. She was one of the first humans to engage alien forces in open combat, and she intended to survive long enough to tell the story. Her squadron dove through the Concorde, defense line like needles through cloth. The alien ships were bigger, older, built for wars that had been fought centuries ago. They moved in patterns that human computers had already predicted. They fired weapons that human shields had already been designed to stop. "Target locked," Era said calmly. "Firing." The Concorde cruiser exploded in a ball of blue flame. Era did not celebrate. There were more targets. There were always more targets. When the battle was over, her squadron had lost 3 pilots. The Concorde had lost 200 ships. It was a ratio that would define the entire war. Elder Vor called for the Grand Fleet. It was the largest military force in the history of the galaxy. 10,000 warships from a dozen species, commanded by admirals who had never lost a battle. They outnumbered humanity 50 to 1. They had weapons that could crack planets. They had experience measured in millennia. They gathered at the edge of human space and waited for the primitives to surrender. The primitives did not surrender. Captain Minho, Lee volunteered for the mission that everyone said was suicide. The Black Lotus was the fastest ship in the human fleet, but fast was not the same as invincible. He would have to fly directly into the heart of the Grand Fleet, past thousands of enemy ships, and deploy an experimental weapon that had never been tested in real combat. His crew understood. They volunteered anyway. "If this works," his engineer said, "we change everything." "If this fails," Minho replied, "someone else will find another way." That is what humans do. The Black Lotus slipped through the Grand Fleet like a shadow through a crowd. Alien sensors searched for them, but human stealth technology was decades ahead of anything the Concorde had seen. Minho held his breath as they passed within 100 meters of a Vorton battleship. No one fired. No one saw them. They reached the center of the formation. Minho looked at the device in the center of his ship, a sphere of metal and light that held enough electromagnetic energy to shut down every system within 1,000 kilometers. "Ready?" he asked his crew. "Ready, Captain?" Minho pressed the button. The pulse expanded outward like a wave of invisible thunder. 300 Concorde ships went dark, their engines dead, their weapons silent, their crews floating in the sudden darkness. The Grand Fleet fell into chaos as ships crashed into each other, as communication lines went dead, as commanders screamed orders that no one could hear. In the confusion, Minho turned his ship around and ran. He should have died. Every calculation said he should have died. But human pilots were not calculations, and human luck was something the galaxy had never learned to measure. The Black Lotus emerged from the chaos with a damaged hull, a wounded crew, and a captain who was already planning his next impossible mission. "Colonel Lim Soo-jin, you landed on the Vorton homeworld with 50 soldiers. They were not there to conquer. They were not there to destroy. They were there for something far more dangerous. They were there to tell the truth. The Vorten people had been told that humans were monsters, beasts who killed for pleasure, creatures who would destroy everything they touched. Their leaders had shown them carefully edited footage, carefully crafted lies, carefully constructed fear. Sujin's team hijacked the planetary broadcast system. For 3 hours, they showed the Vorten people what their leaders had really planned. They showed them Operation Quiet Dawn. They showed them the plague designed to kill human children. They showed them the laughter in the high chamber when Ambassador Quan begged for mercy. When the broadcast ended, the Vorten streets were filled with protesters. Their signs did not call for war against humanity. They called for justice against their own leaders. The Battle of the Pale Nebula was the first major engagement of the war. The Concord sent 800 ships to crush the human fleet once and for all. They found 200 human vessels waiting. In the colorful clouds of gas and dust, Fleet Commander Young-Ji Shin had designed the strategy herself. She was a small woman with a quiet voice, but her mind was a weapon sharper than any blade. She had studied Concord tactics for 20 years. She knew how they thought, how they moved, how they made decisions. "They will try to surround us," she told her captains. "Let them. When they spread out, we strike the center. When they collapse inward, we scatter and regroup. We do not fight their war. We make them fight ours." The battle lasted 12 hours. When the clouds cleared, 600 Concord ships were debris. The human fleet had lost 42 vessels. News of the victory spread across the galaxy like wildfire. General Hannah Choi led the ground assault on the Concord's primary shipyard world. It was a planet of factories and forges, where the great warships of the galaxy were born. Whoever controlled it, controlled the future of the war. The Concord garrison outnumbered her forces 3-1. They had fortified positions, heavy weapons, and orders to hold at any cost. They expected a long siege. Months of grinding warfare. Hannah gave them 3 days. Her soldiers moved like water, finding every crack in the enemy defenses, flowing through gaps that should not have existed. They did not fight the way the Concord expected. They did not line up for honorable battle. They struck from shadows, disappeared, struck again from a different direction. The garrison commanders could not predict them, could not catch them, could not understand how humans moved so fast and hit so hard. On the 3rd day, the garrison surrendered. Hannah walked through the captured shipyards, looking at the half-built warships that would now belong to humanity. She sent a message to command, "Send more crews. We have room." Across the galaxy, the Concord's certainty began to crack. This was not how the war was supposed to go. Humans were supposed to be primitive, emotional, easy to defeat. Instead, they were something else entirely. They were patient. They had planned for decades. They were united. They fought as one people, not as scattered nations. They were adaptive. Every tactic the Concord used, humans countered within days. They were relentless. They did not stop, did not tire, did not give up. Sergeant Major Wukong was the first human soldier to plant a flag on alien soil. He was 60 years old, a veteran of wars on Earth, a man who should have been retired. He had volunteered for the front lines because he could not bear to sit at home, while others fought. When the cameras found him standing on the Concord shipyard, flag in hand, he did not give a victory speech. He simply looked up at the alien sky and said, "My grandfather told me stories about the old wars. He said we fight hardest when we have no choice. We have no choice now. So we will fight until it is over." His words were broadcast across human space. Soldiers watched and nodded. Civilians watched and felt something rise in their chests. Children watched and understood for the first time what it meant to be human. In the ruins of the Grand Fleet, Elder Vor received report after report of defeat. His hands shook. His ancient heart raced. He had lived for 10,000 years. He had never felt fear like this. How? He demanded. How are they doing this? His advisors had no answer. They had underestimated humanity in every possible way. They had seen the small planet, the short lifespans, the violent history, and they had assumed weakness. They had not understood that everything humanity had suffered had made them strong. Every war, every plague, every disaster had taught them how to survive. They had been forged in fire since the beginning of their existence, and now that fire was coming for the Concord. The messages began to arrive on the third month of the war. 3 minor civilizations, species who had been forced to join the Concord centuries ago, sent transmissions to Earth. They had not been part of Operation Quiet Dawn. They had not voted for the genocide. They begged for mercy. The galaxy expected humanity to refuse. Mercy was weakness. Everyone knew that. When you had your enemy on their knees, you crushed them. That was how the strong survived. Ambassador Narration was a woman who had grown up in the shadow of the old wars. Her grandmother had survived a conflict that killed millions. Her mother had spent her life building peace from the ashes. Nara understood hatred better than most, and she understood something else too. Hatred was a fire that burned the one who held it. She stood before the World Council with the surrender messages in her hand. "They are asking for mercy," she said. "They had no part in the plan against us. They were victims of the Concord, just as we almost were." General Hannah Choi shook her head. "They stood by while the Concord planned our destruction. They did nothing. They were afraid," Nara replied, "as we would have been in their place. If we become what they feared we were, then Elder Vor was right about us. Is that what we want?" The room was silent. Admiral Taiho Beek stood slowly, his old joints aching, his heart heavy with years of war and loss. "We are fighting because they tried to murder our children," he said. "If we murder theirs in return, what was the point? What did we save?" The vote was close, but mercy won. The 3 civilizations received complete amnesty. More than that, they received medical aid, food supplies, and protection from the Concord's remaining forces. Human ships arrived not with weapons drawn, but with cargo holds full of medicine and grain. The galaxy watched in confusion. This was not how war was supposed to work. This was not what the terrifying humans were supposed to do. Elder Tova was a Vorton who had lived for 8,000 years. She had served on the council for most of her life. She had warned them, decades ago, that provoking humanity was a mistake. They had ignored her. They had called her a coward. Now she stood before human soldiers. Her hands raised in surrender, offering everything she knew. "I tried to stop them," she said. "I told them that humanity was different. I told them that you could not be contained like the others. They did not listen. They never listen. Colonel Sujin, you studied the old Vorton with careful eyes. She had killed many of Tova's people. She had watched her soldiers die fighting Vorton weapons. Trust did not come easily. Why should we believe you?" she asked. Tova lowered her hands. "Because I have nothing left to lose. Because my people are dying for the arrogance of leaders who hide in palaces while children burn. Because I am tired of being part of something evil." She provided intelligence that changed the course of the war. Defense positions, fleet movements, the locations of hidden bases. More importantly, she testified publicly about Operation Quiet Dawn, about the plague, about the cold calculations that had sentenced billions of humans to death. Her testimony was broadcast across the galaxy. Species who had believed Concord propaganda saw the truth for the first time. The political alliance that had held the Concord together for 10,000 years began to crack. Admiral Hyun-cha commanded the Liberation Fleet. It was not his official title, but it was what his crews called themselves. Their mission was simple: find species that had been enslaved or oppressed by the Concord, and set them free. They expected gratitude. What they found was fear. A small civilization called the Mellery had been conquered by the Concord 3,000 years ago. They had been forced to work in mines, to serve Vorton masters, to forget that they had ever been free. When human ships arrived and broke the Concord occupation, the Mellery waited for the new masters to reveal themselves. Admiral Hain landed on their world alone, unarmed, carrying nothing but a translator and a promise. "We are not here to rule you," he told the gathered crowds. "We are not here to take. We came because no one should live in chains. You are free now. What you do with that freedom is your choice." The Mallory did not believe him at first. Freedom was a word their children did not understand. But humans kept their promise. They left supplies, they left teachers, they left doctors, and then they left. Stories spread from world to world. The humans were coming, but not as conquerors. They were something else, something the galaxy had never seen. Warriors who chose mercy. Victors who asked for nothing in return. The Vortin hegemony grew desperate. Elder Vor watched his alliance crumble, watched species abandon his cause, watched the careful order of 10,000 years fall apart. He needed a victory. He needed to remind the galaxy why they should fear him. He ordered the deployment of the World Breaker. It was a weapon from an older age, a planet killer that had ended wars before they began. It was forbidden by laws that the Concord itself had written, but Elder Vor did not care about laws anymore. He cared only about stopping the humans before it was too late. The World Breaker was aimed at Earth. Admiral Taiho Beak received the warning from Dr. Una Park, whose broken encryption still fed them Concord secrets. He had minutes to decide. The weapon was moving fast, protected by a fleet of desperate defenders. There was no time to gather forces, no time to plan a careful response. He gave the order that every captain in his fleet had hoped they would never hear. All ships, clear my path. I am going in. His flagship, the Eternal Dawn, was not the fastest ship in the fleet. It was not the most agile. But it was built to take punishment that would destroy any other vessel. And Taiho intended to use every bit of that strength. He flew directly into the Concord formation. His shields screamed as weapons fire hammered them from every direction. Hull breaches opened along his ship. Crew members died at their stations, still fee. Gating, still pushing forward, the World Breaker filled his view screen. A massive cylinder of death pointed at his homeworld. Taiho thought of his grandchildren. Playing in a park in Seoul, he thought of sunlight on water, of the smell of rain, of everything that made Earth worth saving. Ramming speed. He said, the Eternal Dawn struck the World Breaker at full velocity. The collision cracked both vessels, sending metal and fire spinning into the void. The planet killer's core destabilized. The weapon that was meant to kill Earth died in a ball of white light. The Eternal Dawn drifted in the wreckage. Half of its hull gone, fires burning in its broken corridors. Emergency teams from the fleet rushed to extract survivors. They found Admiral Taiho Beak alive, bleeding, holding onto a console with hands that would not let go. He had lost half his crew. He had lost his ship. But Earth was safe. When they carried him to the medical bay, he said only one thing. Tell them we are still here. Tell them we will always be here. Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread. The humans had stopped a planet killer with nothing but courage and sacrifice. They had paid a terrible price, but they had paid it willingly. Elder Vor sat in his throne room, surrounded by reports of defeat and defection. His allies were abandoning him. His military was broken. His people were protesting in the streets, demanding an end to a war they no longer believed in. One of his advisors approached carefully. High Speaker, perhaps it is time to consider negotiations. Elder Vor stared at him with ancient, empty eyes. What have we awakened? He asked. No one had an answer. In the void, human ships continued their advance. They were not monsters. They were not the destroyers the Concord had feared. But they were something the galaxy had never seen before. And they would not stop until the war was over. The war lasted 2 years. In the end, the Galactic Concord did not fall because humanity destroyed it. It fell because it destroyed itself. Species that had been held together by fear discovered that fear was not enough. When the Vortin hegemony could no longer protect them, they remembered old grievances, old wounds, old hatreds. Alliances that had lasted for centuries crumbled in months. Governments that had stood for thousands of years collapsed under the weight of their own lies, and through it all, humanity kept its promise. Every world that surrendered was treated with dignity. Every civilian was protected. Every crime was punished, but only the guilty suffered. The humans were hard and fierce in battle, but when the fighting stopped, they put away their weapons and offered their hands. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Conquerors were supposed to take everything. Victors were supposed to demand tribute, territory, slaves. Humanity asked for nothing except justice. Elder Vor was captured on a small moon at the edge of Vorten space. He had fled his homeworld when the people rose against him. He fled from palace to fortress to hidden bunker, always one step ahead of justice. In the end, he was found in a cave, alone, surrounded by screens that showed nothing but static. The soldiers who captured him were young humans who had grown up hearing stories of the monster, who had tried to kill their world. They had every reason to hate him. They had every right to hurt him. They did not touch him. They put restraints on his wrists, led him to a ship, and treated him with cold, professional efficiency. Elder Vor searched their faces for hatred. For the violence he had always believed was at the core of humanity, he found nothing but emptiness. They did not care enough about him to hate him. The journey to Earth took 3 weeks. Elder Vor spent that time in a comfortable cell, fed regular meals, allowed to rest. No one tortured him. No one even questioned him. They simply let him sit and think about what he had done. It was worse than torture. The world. The council gathered in the same bunker where they had declared war 2 years before. The room was different now, filled with representatives from dozens of species who had joined humanity's cause. Admiral Taiho Beek sat in a wheelchair, still recovering from wounds that would never fully heal. Dr. Yuna Park stood beside him. Her work finally done, her people finally safe. They brought Elder Vor before the council in chains. He had shrunk somehow, his ancient body bent, his gray skin pale. He looked around at the faces of the species he had ruled for 10,000 years. Species that now looked at him with contempt or pity or nothing at all. Admiral Taiho Beek rose slowly from his wheelchair, refusing the help his aides offered. He walked to where Elder Vor stood, each step careful and painful. The two of them faced each other, the old human and the ancient alien, the warrior and the tyrant. "You tried to murder my grandchildren," Taiho said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent room. "You tried to wipe out my species because you were afraid of what we might become. You called it mercy. You called it protection. You called it necessary." Elder Vor said nothing. There was nothing to say. "We could kill you," Taiho continued. "It would be easy. It would be justified. Every law of war would allow it. Every person in this room would understand." He paused, looking around at the gathered representatives. "But that is what you expected of us, is it not? That is what you told the galaxy we were. Monsters, killers, a species that deserved to be caged." General Hannah Choi stepped forward. Her eyes were hard, her voice cold. "You will not be executed. You will not be given the dignity of a quick death. You will be taken to a barren moon at the edge of known space. You will be given supplies, shelter, and everything you need to survive. And you will live there alone for the rest of your existence." Elder Vor's eyes widened. "Alone? For how long?" "Until you die," Hannah replied. "However long that takes. Death is easy, Elder Vor. Regret is forever." They took him away. The galaxy never saw him again. Some said he lived for another 1,000 years on that moon, staring up at stars that no longer recognized his name. Some said he went mad within decades. No one knew for certain, and no one cared enough to find out. The new Galactic Assembly was formed 6 months later. Humanity was a founding member, not as rulers, but as equals. The old hierarchies were gone, replaced by a system where every species had a voice. Where power was shared instead of hoarded, Dr. Yuna Park became the first human to chair the Assembly's Science Council. She used her position to share technology freely, to build bridges instead of weapons, to create the future that humanity had always deserved. When reporters asked her about the war, about the fear, about the dark times, she smiled and said, "We survived because we remembered who we were. We will thrive because we remember who we want to be." Captain Minho Lee, now Admiral Minho Lee, was given command of a new fleet. His mission was not conquest or defense. He was sent to the edges of known space, to the places where no Concorde ship had ever traveled. To make first contact with species who had never heard of the old wars, His orders came from Ambassador Narration herself. She handed him a sealed document with simple instructions. Show them who we really are. Not the warriors they have heard about. Not the conquerors they might fear. Show them the best of us. Minho accepted the mission with a nod. He understood. The war was over, but the work of being human was never finished. Elder Tova spent the rest of her life working for reconciliation. She traveled from world to world, speaking about what the Concord had done wrong, urging her people to learn from their mistakes. Many Vortons hated her for it. Many others loved her. She did not care about either. She cared only about the future. On Earth, life slowly returned to normal. Children who had been born during the war grew up in peace. Families who had lost everything rebuilt their lives. The scars remained in the hearts of the old and the memories of the young. But humanity did not let those scars define them. Admiral Taiho Beak retired to a small house by the sea. He spent his days watching the waves, reading old books, playing with grandchildren who had almost never existed. Sometimes late at night, he thought about the war. He thought about the friends he had lost, the decisions he had made, the weight of everything he had carried. He did not regret it. He had done what was necessary, but he was glad it was over. On a distant world, far from Earth, far from the old Concord, far from everything the war had touched, a young alien child asked her mother a question. "Mother, who are the humans?" The mother paused. She had heard stories like everyone had. Stories of warriors who came from a small blue planet. Stories of a species that had been pushed to the edge of extinction and had pushed back. Stories that frightened some and inspired others. They were wronged, she said finally. A long time ago, the old powers tried to destroy them. They thought humans were too dangerous to live. They thought they could kill them quietly and no one would notice. What happened? They were wrong. The humans survived. They fought Ba. They won. The mother looked up at the stars, thinking about all the things she had heard. But that is not why people remember them. They could have become destroyers. They had every right to hate the galaxy for what was done to them. Instead, they chose to become something else. What did they become? The mother smiled. They became the ones who helped. When worlds were burning, they brought water. When people were starving, they brought food. When species were afraid, they brought protection. They never forgot what was done to them, but they chose to heal anyway. The child was quiet for a moment. That seems hard. It is. That is why the galaxy fears them. That is why the galaxy needs them, because they are strong enough to be kind. In the vastness of space, human ships continued their journeys. They explored new worlds, met new species, built new friendships. They carried with them the memory of everything they had survived and the hope of everything they might become. They were humanity. They had walked through fire and emerged not as monsters, but as something the galaxy had never expected. They were still learning. They were still growing. They were still making mistakes, but they were also still choosing every day to be better than the darkness that had tried to destroy them. And in the end, that choice was what made them human.